This is an example of the DRV question that you'll get in your question paper. So you're always given a sentence about the person that you're going to be evaluating. So in this case, we have a 16-year-old girl who's an ice skater and she trains 4 times a week. The second piece of information that you're given is a table. So the table below shows the dietary reference values for females aged 15 to 18 years old. And this first table is just showing what the person should be eating in a day. So this girl should be eating 2,414 calories per day, 42.1 grams of protein, 40 milligrams of vitamin C, 14.8 milligrams of iron, 1,000 milligrams of calcium, and 25 grams of fibre. Our second table shows the dietary analysis of the 16-year-old girl. So this is what she is actually eating in a day. So we can see here that she's eaten 2,865 calories, 60.2 grams of protein, 49 milligrams of vitamin C, etc. And then finally, you've got your question. So taking account of the dietary reference values for females aged 15 to 18, evaluate the suitability of her typical day's meals. And this question is always worth 6 marks in total. Remember, it's an evaluate question as well, so we're going to be answering in fact, opinion, consequence style. Before you start to answer your question, there's a couple of things that you need to do first. So the first thing that you want to do is you should highlight the information that you've been given about the person. So what is their age? In this case, they're 16. What's their gender? She's female. And then if there's any extra information in the question. So in this case, this girl's an ice skater and she's training 4 times a week. The second thing that you want to do is you want to compare the second table to the first table. So you're comparing what she's actually eating to what she should be eating. And you're going to put your arrows. So we can see here that she's consuming more energy than she requires. She's eaten 2,865 calories and she only needs to eat 2,414. So we're going to put an upwards arrow there because she's eating more than she requires. Similarly for protein, she's also eaten more than she requires because she's eaten 60.2 grams of protein and she only needs to eat 42.1 grams. The same for vitamin C. She's eating 49 milligrams of vitamin C and she only needs to eat 40. However, for iron, she's eating less than she requires because she's only eating 11.2 milligrams and she should be eating 14.8. Calcium is also lower. She's only eating 915 milligrams and she should be eating 1,000. And the same for fibre. She should be eating 25 grams, but she's only eating 13.1 grams. So how do you evaluate? Remember, for any evaluate question, you always need to give a fact, an opinion, and a consequence, and that's how you get 1 mark. So for this particular question, we want to give a fact about what she's eating. So that would just simply be, is the nutrient intake higher or lower than she requires? So remember, for this example, she's eating more energy than she requires, she's eating more protein than she requires, she's eating more vitamin C than she requires, etc. You've then got to give an opinion. So is this a good or a bad thing? Sometimes it can be both, and that would lead into your consequence. So that is just you explaining why this is a good or a bad thing. And once you've done that, you will get 1 mark after that. You will also need to, for your DRV question, add in at least 2 developed consequences. And that's how you would get a 2nd mark. So developed consequence can either be going into more detail about the consequence that you wrote above, or it can be discussing another function of that nutrient. So remember, the DRV question is worth 6 marks. So how do you actually get those 6 marks? there's two different ways you can achieve those 6 marks. You can either do 4 fact, opinion, consequences and then provide 2 developed consequences, or you can do 3 fact, opinion, consequences and provide a developed consequence for each of them. You cannot write an answer about each nutrient, however, so you will be given a choice of 6 different nutrients in the DRV question, but you can only choose either 3 nutrients to evaluate or 4 nutrients to evaluate. And you need to develop at least 2 of those answers. So here we have an example answer for energy. So we've given a fact, that's in purple. The 16-year-old girl has more energy than she requires, which isn't good, is our opinion. And our consequence, so this is us explaining why it's not a good thing that she has more energy than she requires, as any extra energy could be converted to fat and could lead to obesity. So we've got 1 mark for that fact, opinion, consequence, 1 mark for that evaluation. We've also been specific to the person in the question because we've mentioned this 16-year-old girl. We've then went on to develop this answer and we've said this could increase her risk of coronary heart disease in later life. So again, we've been specific to the girl, the person in the question, by saying that she's going to develop CHD in later life if she continues with this excess energy intake. So that's how we could get 2 marks for energy. Our next example answer is protein. So our fact for protein is that the 16-year-old girl is having more protein in her diet than she needs. Our opinion, which is good, and then our consequence, so why is this a good thing? As this will help repair damaged cells if she injures herself whilst training. So remember, she's an ice skater and she's training 4 times a week. So we've been specific to the person in the question. We've stated that it's a 16-year-old girl, and we've also linked back to the fact that she's training. So the first box would be our fact, our opinion, and our consequence, and that would get us 1 mark. We've then went on and provided more detail in blue, which is our developed consequence, and that would get us a 2nd mark. So we've provided an additional function of protein, and we've stated that this protein can also be used as an additional energy source to prevent her getting tired whilst training. So we've given a 2nd function of protein, and we've also been specific to the person in the question by stating that she's not going to get tired whilst training. Our next example answer is for vitamin C. So we've started off with our opinion in this example by stating that the 16-year-old girl's vitamin C intake is suitable, and then we've given a fact as it's more than she requires, and then we've given our consequence as this will help her absorb iron. So this will get us 1 mark. We've been specific to the person in the question because we stated it's a 16-year-old girl. We've given a fact, we've given an opinion, and we've given a consequence. We've then went on to say that this extra vitamin C will also help heal any cuts or wounds she gets during training. So this is our developed consequence. So that's how we've got a 2nd mark for vitamin C, as we've given a 2nd function of vitamin C, and we've been specific to the person in the question by saying that she will heal any cuts or wounds that she gets during training. Our next example answer is for fibre. So again, we started off with our opinion, stating that the fibre intake for the 16-year-old girl is not good, as it's less than she needs. So that's our opinion, and then we've got our fact in purple. In green, we have got our consequence, so we're explaining why this isn't a good thing, and that's because it will increase her risk of constipation. So again, we've given a fact, an opinion, and a consequence. We've been specific to the 16-year-old girl, so we've got our 1st mark for fibre. We've then went on and given a developed consequence for a second mark, stating that this could increase her risk of bowel cancer in later life. So again, being specific by saying it's going to happen in later life. Our next example answer is for iron. So our iron intake is lower than required. So this is our fact. This is unsuitable for the 16-year-old girl, which is our opinion, and we've also been specific to the 16-year-old girl. And finally our consequence, as this will make her feel tired. So that is us got our first mark for iron. Our second mark for iron is coming from our developed consequence. So we are continuing on with the same function of iron, saying that this could increase her risk of anemia, especially as she loses blood and iron each month during her period. So this is us given a developed consequence for our second mark. And we've also been specific to the person in the question by stating she's obviously a 16-year-old girl, so she will have her period each month. Our next example answer is for calcium. So we started off with a fact stating that our calcium intake is less than required for a 16-year-old girl. We've then moved on to our opinion by stating this is bad, and then our consequence, so why is this a bad thing? As her bones won't develop as strong during her growth spurt. So again, we've been specific to the person in the question is a 16-year-old girl and she will be going through a growth spurt. So that's us got our first mark. We could then go on and develop this answer for a second mark and state that this could increase her risk of osteoporosis in later life. So here is an example answer that is worth 6 marks. So you can see here, each of the ones in brackets is where this person is getting 1 mark. The bits that are highlighted in blue are developed consequences. So this person has provided a fact, an opinion and a consequence for calcium. They've then went on to develop this answer and they've got a second mark. The answer for energy is just fact, opinion, consequence, so we've just got 1 mark for that. The answer for protein is the same as energy. We've given a fact, we've given an opinion, and we've given a consequence, so that would just be worth 1 mark. The final answer about vitamin C has given a fact, opinion, and a consequence, so they've got 1 mark, and then they've went on to develop that answer. So they've got a second mark for vitamin C, which is also a developed consequence. So here are a few things to remember whilst you're answering your DRV question. The first thing you want to do is remember to be specific to the person in the question. So make sure you're stating it's a 16-year-old girl, for example. In some of your answers, remember we stated back to the fact that she was training 4 times a week, also referring back to the fact that she was having her period each month as well. Also remember it's an evaluate question, so you need to have a fact, an opinion and a consequence to get your first mark. And then you also need to provide some developed consequences, which is how you get a second mark for a nutrient. And the final thing to remember is you can only write about a maximum of 4 nutrients. So remember the question is worth 6 marks in total. You can either write about 4 different nutrients and then provide 2 developed consequences, or you can write about 3 nutrients and then give a developed consequence for each of those nutrients.